Hi, this is Michael Witwer, and you're listening to the FSF Popcast.
The show that makes authors and writers wish their backspace button was more of a mute button.
Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. And just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 1974. She'll know that when she puts on the red shirt and joins the crew of the Enterprise in their struggle against Amber Grossman and her mean girls, that she didn't leave her family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has her back, and what's left of her Beasts and Battlements game.
All right, guys, our guest today is an amazing author whose books have hit and are continuing to hit the New York Times bestseller lists. And we are excited to be able to talk with him today because he's written books like Dungeons and Dragons, Art and Arcana. There's Lore and Legends. There's Heroes Feast, which is a D&D cookbook, and there's another cookbook, and there's more D&D book. There's a lot. Just hold on a second. We're getting there. And then he's also has an amazing young adult book, probably about middle grade age is what I would say. It's called Vivian Van Tassel. And that book is outstanding. I'm currently reading it. My daughter's currently reading it. And frankly, we adore the book. It's phenomenal. So it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. We are proud and happy to welcome Michael Witwer to the FSF Podcast. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much, Tim, Kathleen. I am proud and happy to be here. And I was really sorry to miss my co-authors a few weeks ago when you had them on the live stream. I'm sorry, I actually could not come that night, but I was jealous, and so that's when you and I connected, and I'm really glad to be here now.
You know, they don't get the one-on-one attention that you do, though.
Well, yeah, I mean that's true. That's true. It was all part of my master plan.
I mean, your brother did technically, but
Kyle did.
Okay,
that's
so
true. You've had them separately.
Yeah, we've had Sam on the show a while back, and then we had Kyle on the show, and I've been talking with Jon to try and get him to come on the show as well because he just seems to have such a wealth of information and knowledge about D&D that I'd like to pick his brain.
At least
you can talk to Jon forever.
At least you're not the last one to get the one-on-one attention. Let's go with that.
well, thank you for that. I'll still feel honored, nonetheless. But Jon, I would strongly encourage you to get Jon on the show because, boy, he can just talk forever about any depth that you want with regards to D&D history, game history, you name it. He is a special person. So, but anyway, I'm glad to be here now, here on this beautiful Saturday.
We are very excited.
All right, so Michael, you had a couple books come out recently, both inside of the D&D, and if you're looking at our background, you can see the outlines of the Lore and Legends book. That is the special edition copy of the Lore and Legends book, which is just phenomenally beautiful. That is really cool looking book. And also this really super cool book right here, Vivian Van Tassel. This is awesome. The Secrets of Midnight Lake. Like I said, I've been reading it. My daughter's been reading it. We're loving it. So let's start with that book. Let's talk about Vivian Van Lake right now, because that's the one I'm currently reading and most excited about. But tell us about the story about that book, how that came to be, and all the fun stuff around it.
Yeah, sure, Tim. Thanks for asking. So, it's been a long year of books. I'm just going to say it. I have limped into the finish line of this year. I mean, so I did three books over 5 years, and then it's been 4 books that came out this year. So I really like it. It really kind of everything crunched up. Oh yeah, it was a hard one. So everything really crunched up this year. Starting with the Legend of Drizzt book that came out, which was a DK visual dictionary, the first D&D visual dictionary that came out in March, and then it's been kind of one book after another. And I know we'll have a chance to talk about a couple of them. But so Vivian Van Tassel is a book I've been working on since 2020, but it's got a much much longer history than that.
Okay.
It came out at the end of August. And Tim, as you may or may not have known, I'm not sure to what degree, you've studied a lot of D&D history outside of, again, what you've been talking about with my co-authors and with Lore and Legends and so forth. But so right. Vivian Van Tassel is an idea I came up with in 20, I think it was 2013 or 2014. And it was when I was writing my first book, which was a book called Empire of Imagination, which was a biography about Gary Gygax, the co-creator of D&D. And one thing that I found when I was writing that biography was that when Gary was a young man in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. So again, that's where D&D was born. That's where Gary Gygax lived. Dave Arneson lived in the Twin Cities, and Gary lived in Lake Geneva. And when he was a young man, probably between 10 and 13 years old, he used to tell the story how he used to always wander around the abandoned Oakwood Sanitarium in Lake Geneva. So when Gary was a kid, so this is the 50s, right? There was literally an abandoned sanitarium on the hill. And when I say on the hill, Lake Geneva is this kind of this beautiful woodsy resort town in southern Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin. And when you drive into Lake Geneva, you drive kind of into a bowl. You're actually like on a higher ground, and you drive into a bowl. So basically, the highest point in town is kind of when you drive in, and that is what they call Catholic Hill, because on one side of the hill there's this big Catholic church, and in the old days, on the other side of the hill there was this Oakwood Sanitarium, which was this 4-story towering Romanesque looking building that was built around the turn of the century, built around I think it was built in 1885, actually a little bit earlier than that. And it was this kind of ominous looking building. Well, so when Gary was young, this building was abandoned. It had been abandoned since the mid-20s. And I've seen pictures of it, and you almost can't believe this was a real place. But all of the windows were knocked out, and it was this really spooky looking building on the hill that literally overlooked the town of Lake Geneva. It was pretty wild, right? So anyway, long story short, Gary used to tell this story, and so as a biography, you try to validate anything that your subject talks about, right? So I started to look into the history of the sanitarium in Lake Geneva. What was interesting about it is that I ended up tripping on there was like a half dozen sanitariums in Lake Geneva. Right. And what's weird about that is Lake Geneva is a town of like 8,000 people full time. Like the population swells in the summer, but like full time, year round, it's like 8,000 people. So I'm like, why in the world is there so many sanitariums in this tiny little town? Right. And there's actually some very, very practical reasons why this was the case in this particular town. But I just thought it was a really interesting fact. And so one day when I had just tripped on this fact when I was writing Empire of Imagination, I felt like it hit me like a lightning bolt one morning when I was on my way into work on the train, that I came up with this what if scenario that was a fictional scenario. And the what if became, wow, okay, so the town of Lake Geneva, the town where D&D was born, hosts all of these sanitariums. So maybe there was so many sanitariums because there was people seeing delusions. And the delusions they were seeing is that they would see things like bears with the faces of owls in the woods, and they would see floating eyeballs with 10 eye stalks on the top, right? And they would see things like this, and people would say, well, you're not well, we're going to commit you to these sanitariums. That's why they had so many. And so again, this is where I trip on this idea that, well, maybe Gary wasn't writing a game based on what he imagined. Maybe he was writing a game based on what he saw in the environs of Lake Geneva, right? So that's what led me to this idea of Vivian Van Tassel and the Secret of Midnight Lake. And of course, everything has an analog here. The game D&D in the book is Beast and Battlements. And it was found in this town of Midnight Lake. And, Vivian basically comes into town, and Tim, as you've already discovered in your reading, basically she ends out starting to play this game Beast of Battlements. And what she's going to start to realize is there's some really weird similarities between this game Beast and Battlements and then some old case files that she finds from these old sanitariums in Midnight Lake. And so that's kind of where all the rubber hit the road. But again, ultimately, I just wanted to really write a really fun kind of, again, middle grade novel. Think, Harry Potter and Percy Jackson and Fablehaven group books like that. But a really, really fun novel that is kind of a love letter to D&D. And, my love of D&D history and so forth. And so it kind of includes all of that. And hopefully you're enjoying it. And again, so far, I've gotten really spectacular feedback on that book so far. I've been doing a lot of school tours where I've been talking about it. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, and you should be getting fantastic feedback on it. It is very enjoyable. And if you are a Harry Potter fan, you will notice that there are a ton of Harry Potter references in this book. And so it ties in very well. Question for you though. So Vivian goes to Mirkwood Middle School. Is Mirkwood a tie-in to or a nod to Elder Scrolls?
No, actually, that's a great call because I know there is a Mirkwood reference in Elder Scrolls. The Mirkwood I was actually referencing was Lord of the Rings. Now, it's not a direct tie-in. I just liked I liked the name and the ring of it, of course, and I spell it differently than Tolkien spells it, right? But I spell it, I think, maybe the same way. I don't remember if Elder Scrolls spells Mirkwood with M-I or M-U. I don't remember, but
M-U. That's why
it is M-U. Okay. So it's a similar spelling. There's also like a Mirkwood like nature area in the U.S. as well. It's spelled that way. So there's a few different places, but I didn't get it from Elder Scrolls, although I'm aware of that. I became aware of it later. I was thinking more about the Tolkien reference, but again, it doesn't actually have a tie-in other than the fact that I think it's a great name for a middle school.
It's a great name.
No, it's great. The more I heard it, I was like, and I didn't even think of the Tolkien reference. Honestly, I was just thinking, I was like, I know I've heard that in a video game. Where have I heard that? And so I went and did a Google search on it because I was like, it's one of those things. It's once it got in between the ears, then I couldn't get it out. And I'm like, I gotta look this up. I gotta figure out what the issue is here, where this is from. And so I was able to track it down. I was like, oh, Elder Scrolls. I wonder if that's where he's from. So that's why I asked. But yeah,
absolutely. No, and I had a lot of fun. A lot of what I was thinking about with this book. Again, and I of course I would say this, but I think it's a really, really great way to introduce young people to the joys of role-playing games, right? It has kind of fun role-playing game scenes in it. But the part with me that I thought was really, that I focused on at least a lot, was I was really interested in bringing the reality of what Vivian is going through and just the reality of maybe real monsters and things like that being in your world, right? That by itself is really disruptive. And I think sometimes what happens with middle grade fantasy and young adult fantasy is it almost ignores the standard stuff and it kind of goes right to these really wild, elaborate plots. And I'm like, just imagine for a second of, the reality that and all of a sudden something that's really literally a monster that comes out of your books or out of the screen is in your world. It would be a really wild thing to try to deal with. And so I'm really focused on that, on Vivian trying to cope with this reality of possibly real monsters, being in her world and what she has to do about it. And one of the reasons you had mentioned Harry Potter, and there are Harry Potter references in there. In fact, what the deal is that Vivian reads Harry Potter. She's a big fan of the Harry Potter series, right?
The checklist.
The checklist that she keeps in her thing, right? She kind of compares herself to Harry and kind of starts to realize that her life sucks more than Harry's, which is like, well, that's wild. But the one reason I gripped onto that is that I was thinking to myself, what is a way a young person might cope with the idea of the reality of like monsters being in your world? Well, keep in mind, there are very, very few intellectual properties that are truly ubiquitous to young people, right? You've got like Star Wars. If you think about how many things you can kind of name drop to a young person, most of them they actually won't know. Oh, it's like Stranger Things. They're like, Stranger Things, I'm not allowed to watch that. Or like, oh, it's like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, I can't watch it. Like a lot of things that we take for granted as terms of fantasy, that's not available to them, right? So how many things really are? And what's the median thing that most kids will know? And you start to realize the list is very, very small, and Harry Potter is one of them. So I thought it would be nice to try to tie this into something that's familiar to most young people, or many, many young people. That's how Vivian would interpret seeing these things. Oh, when she hears about like real world spells, oh, that's like Harry Potter, right? You wouldn't think D&D. Kids don't know D&D, right? It's like a 12+ game. So that was part of my thinking around how to make it relatable to younger people.
No, it's very smart. That was a great tie-in. And as a matter of fact, when I was reading it, I thought that I was like, he was smart to use Harry Potter. Because not only just because of the popularity of the Harry Potter series, but the attraction of the younger audience, that would, be a good tie-in. So yeah, very smartly done on that. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how this book finishes up. That's all I'm going to say. I'm excited about it.
Well, thank you. No, I have to tell you, I feel like you're getting to the place where I get most excited about, where it really starts to cook, and it doesn't stop until the end. So I really hope you enjoy it. I can tell you, I hope you enjoyed it at least half as much as I enjoyed writing it. I enjoyed the heck out of this process. As someone who's written a ton of nonfiction books about fictional topics, for me to actually write a true like fiction novel, I enjoyed the heck out of it. So I really hope you enjoy it. And anyone out there that's interested in again, like young adult and middle grade fantasy, I think it might be something you might enjoy.
So one more note about this book for anybody who's listening and considering books for either themselves or their middle grade child. One of the things that's nice about this book, and I have 3 kids, and all my kids are older, and my youngest, my daughter, is just about ready to turn 17. So, we went through the middle grade child age books and all these different things. And that was one of the things that attracted us to Percy Jackson books, was the fact that when we read the Percy Jackson books, we actually felt like we were reading something about their age group.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the nice things about Vivian Van Tassel, is that when I read this book, here's a 12-year-old girl dealing with the loss of her mother, dealing with having to move out of Chicago up to, Midnight Lake, the area that she's not familiar with, this creepy school, all these weird things, being the new person. And I thought that for what I have read so far, that you've done a really good job identifying the place that she's in her life, identifying what she's going through, because I feel like a lot of the middle grade books that I would used to read with my kids, because I would read them and they would read them together, we'd read them together and all these things, I always felt like if there was anything that was in their life, it was more of like a backdrop to the story. It didn't really affect the character or what was going on. It was just like, oh yeah, Toby lost his dad, that sucks, but anyway, here's the story. But this is a very integrated part of who and what she is, and I think it's very good that they're, even the struggles that she has in the school with some of the people in the school, and how she reacts to them. And like, she's 12, of course she's not going to know how to control her temper, and she's not going to know how to control these things. And anyway, just kudos for nailing down that age group pretty well, and handling that, and the way that kids talk and interact with each other. It feels very lifelike in comparison to some of the other middle grade books I've read.
Gosh, Tim, thanks so much for saying that. Honestly, and I'm going to give props to my editor, Kara Sargent at Aladdin, Simon & Schuster, because, she was one that really helped me peel that back, because it's funny, to your point, I was so interested in telling this, again, that little lightning bolt idea I had that I came up with when I was writing Empire. I was so interested in getting to that story, this idea of finding out through these case files, but ultimately she's like, this is a story about a person. And she really, it's funny, as much as I was in love, you might say, with the story, she was in love with the character. And
right.
So that marriage really helped me. She would always challenge me to step back and say, what's going on with Vivian? What's going on with Vivian? And that was a great lesson to me. To remember that these are three-dimensional people, and you really, really, to make it a relatable book, especially to a middle grade reader, it's all about what's going on with them. What are they feeling? What are they sensing? These are, and I'm so grateful that you pointed that out. And to your point, I love Rick Riordan. I think Percy Jackson is absolutely dynamite. And it's funny because one thing that I realized that he's got going for it, one of the best choices he made, at least in the first Percy Jackson, making that book first person was a hugely it was such a strong choice, because all of a sudden you are in Percy's head and you're experiencing all these wild things, and it's so easy to relate to this character. Even though he's got a chip on his shoulder, right? He's really kind of that way, but very few people can't relate, I think, to that character in some way or another.
Right.
So I thought about all these things as we were going forward. But again, I give a lot of props to my editor, who really always challenged me to keep coming back to what's going on with Vivian, what's going on with Vivian. And so far, what we've heard so far is that kids are connecting with it for that very reason, independent of the story, which I think is a good hook, but still it's about the character. And so thank you for that.
Yeah.
Awesome. That is fantastic.
Now that I'm over here researching sanatoriums in Lake Geneva, because that's where my brain goes with things, I'm like, I had to look at pictures of it. That place is creepy looking.
Right?
So did you find a picture by chance of it when it was abandoned or before it was abandoned?
I found it from before it was abandoned.
Okay. I'm going to share with you a picture.
Enough.
It's wild. You can't even believe what this place looked like when it was actually like abandoned. You're like, wow. It's the kind of thing that somebody talks about, especially, well-known people. The reality is, what you find when you do biography, no matter who you deal with, you tend to find that stories morph and meld over time, right? The people's memories get fuzzy, or sometimes a legend starts to grow around their thing that you do have to validate, right? In some way or another. And so when you hear about this story, you're like, wow, was there really a sanitarium in town? And what was the deal? And for what it's worth, when Gary used to tell the story, he actually used to call it by the wrong name, which was a complicating factor in trying to figure out what place he was talking about. He used to call it Oak Hill Sanitarium, which is again one of these little things you're trying to read between the lines at what place was he talking about. Right. So once I figured it all out, and then found this place, and then found a a 1950s era or 1940s era picture of it, I'm like, wow, no wonder this was such a wild experience for this young troublemaker running around town. Like, one of the things you did if you were a young troublemaker is you'd dare each other to go up to the Oakwood Sanitarium and wander around these abandoned, it was like an abandoned castle. So I will absolutely send you a follow-up picture of this, just if you're curious. Maybe you can put it in the show notes or something. But
yeah, absolutely.
It's super cool. You got to see this thing.
It's super creepy. And then like finding out that the doctor who started it then expanded. And so that was part of the reason that there were the other sanitariums in town, was that this facility wasn't big enough. And it's like, oh man, that's a lot of creepy.
Dr. Oscar King, right? I'm testing my knowledge here, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So
lovely.
There's this morbid sense of curiosity for me with sanitariums. I actually have a replica of the New York Asylum lock, like literally over on my shelf. I have a replica of it. I would have to go get it. And like, I've had people who've had issues with why do you have things about sanitariums? They were so terrible to people. I'm like, yes, they were. And we learned so much from that. We learned so much about how you actually should treat people. But yeah. No,
absolutely. Well, and it's funny. It's one thing that, again, it takes a little bit of you might say it takes a little bit of the intrigue out of what was the real world. Because it's funny. And I did a recent interview where somebody said, well, Mike, you said you'd kind of figured out, what was the real world reason why Lake Geneva had so many sanitariums? And no, it wasn't because there was real monsters coming out of a thing. And again, I won't talk about that anymore until. Cool, though. Yeah, it's Lake Geneva is such a fascinating town because they used to call it the Newport of the West. Mm-hmm. So think of it that way. It's this really Tony, otherwise this woodsy, beautiful fishing town, this huge 20-mile around, deep lake, mm-hmm. great fishing lake, woodsy area. And it attracted, think of it as kind of the country estates of all really, really wealthy families from Chicago and Milwaukee. They would build these mansions right there on the lakeshore, right? And so, and I mean like families like you would know, like the Maytag family, the Schwinn family, the Wrigley family. They all had mansions on the lake. And
the
so
Fisher Nut family's also up there.
Yeah, there you go. So you know more than I do. And so consider the true reason why these sanitariums were there, very likely, is these were not the kind of sanitariums that were like lock and key type of facilities. That's how I kind of spin it in Vivian. But again, the real history is these were more facilities that were almost more bed and breakfasty for people that were having like nervous disorders, fainting spells, things like that. These are like old like diagnoses they would use. So the real reason is that they were like really expensive facilities that people would go that had a lot of money actually. And they had these big, Victorian and Romanesque. They were not institutional looking buildings. They were actually very fancy buildings. And so that's likely why Lake Geneva had a lot of these. There was a lot of money there and people that wanted to get better. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that was kind of what I was seeing too in the one article I was just looking at very briefly was it was more of a celebrity resort type sanitarium than I can't deal with this family member, institutionalize them sanitarium.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's really what it was. But again, so I took a different tack, obviously, in Vivian Van Tassel. It's a little bit more interesting if these are more lock and key type of facilities for what we were trying to accomplish, at least in that narrative.
For sure. As much as I want to continue talking about your books, Tim is a stinky jerk face who hasn't actually shared them yet. I haven't gotten my hands on them yet. And
nope, they're mine.
I did actually get a chance to browse Heroes Feast during my last Barnes & Noble trip, but my husband has started a 2-book limit claiming something about financial ruin or bankruptcy or
something about that.
Some silly reason that I'm only allowed to buy 2 books.
Some pish posh.
Yeah. But, thinking about all of the books that you've done for D&D, what got you into D&D to begin with?
Yeah. So my brother, who obviously you know well, you've obviously had him on now a couple of times. So Sam is 3 years older than I am. It's just us two. And we're from, you might know this, but so we're from the Chicago area, Glenview to be exact, which is a north suburb of Chicago. And when we were kids, what happened was there was, this is like the mid 80s at this point, and there was an older kid that we knew, or to be exact, he was an older brother of some really, really good friends of ours who had a bunch of late 70s and early 80s AD&D books, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, what they called it back then. And so he had dungeon mastered the game for us and our friends a little bit periodically. And he decided he was done with D&D. D&D, there's a lot of reasons why people wanted to be done with D&D in the mid 80s. But he was done with D&D. So he was selling his books, and my brother became nuts about the game and decided he wanted to buy them. So my brother bought this kid's stack of AD&D books. And then this became the every weekend activity that we would do on sleepovers, is that my brother would run us through whatever adventure he wanted to torment me and my friends with. So we were like his guinea pigs. And we're young, by the way. I'm talking like, I bet I'm 6 or 7. I bet, and he's probably 9 or 10. And as Sam has pointed out, he's like, I can't imagine I had any idea what the hell was going on with this game. There's no way we could have been following the rules per se. But that's the fun of it, is that in a weird sort of way, D&D is a game where you take these rules, which they themselves called guidelines, and you kind of interpret them whatever way you need to make this strange narrative game work. There's resolution through dice. So we were playing D&D, as early as I can remember, pretty much. And this is what we did. And so we played it throughout my childhood. We ended up getting really deep into the Star Wars role-playing game a few years later. And I know Sam's talked about that extensively. First, the original West End game, that we played all the versions from there on in for 10 and 20 year campaigns, long campaigns. So I grew up playing role-playing games. And to answer your question more directly, though, Kathleen, so I've been into D&D since I was young, but what was interesting about the way we thought about it is consider, in the mid 80s, you've probably heard the legends of the Satanic Panic and all of the concern about this game, right? And so the idea that the game was kind of created right up the road in Lake Geneva, that's only 70 miles maybe from where we lived. It's a straight north shot from where we lived. So it was kind of a local phenomenon. And it's obviously very big in Michigan as well, as you probably well know. Very Midwest phenomenon. So as well as Minnesota and Indiana and so forth. But the name Gary Gygax was on the front of all these books we grew up with. And he was this really shadowy figure, because if you didn't have access to media, or you didn't really follow the path along, one reason I got so interested in who Gary Gygax was is that when I grew up, I'd been playing role-playing games now for 25, 30 years, and I never really thought back, who was this Gary Gygax person that grew up right up the road, and he was kind of the head of everything. And during the Satanic Panic, he was vilified for being this strange hermit that created this game that was dangerous to young people, at least so the news would have you believe. And so I had never really thought back, other than the fact that I had realized how formative the game had been to me and to my imagination. And I got really interested in who this person was that had co-created this game. And so that's how I had actually started doing my original research on that first book I wrote, Empire of Imagination. And kind of the rest is history. So again, I've been playing games and thinking about role-playing games for as long as I can remember.
That's awesome. So then if you had to choose, and you could only play one character build for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I really, really like the monk. I really like now the monk has changed quite a bit over time within the game. But one thing I like about the monk character generally is I love characters that, from a combat perspective, there's different type of archetypes I'll play. I like bards. I like a lot of different character types. But I like the monk because as the monk gets more and more advanced, assuming you survive, there's more and more amazing things you can do without anything. I love the notion that you can be stripped of all of your equipment, all of your stuff, all of your weapons, and the monk is still fine. The monk is still fine. Again, the original archetypes that they built, and again, a lot of that has followed even all the way through 5th edition, but your AC continues to improve as you get more and more advanced, your hit points continue to go up and all this stuff. So the monk at one point becomes this kind of this wrecking ball, but he doesn't need anything, which I think is really cool. So I've always loved monk characters, and all time. And again, but that's probably the one I like best. I've played a monk for a while now.
I have actually not played a monk yet. I think I should, but
Me either.
Well, you've also only played one game.
I'm a noob, so
he is, and we started him with Star Wars Saga Edition. So.
Oh wow! Well, I loved the Star Wars Saga Edition. We played a lot of Star Wars role playing. We played all these different versions. Saga, my recollection is, has a lot of customization. Like there's a lot of, I don't remember if it has feats, right? I think Saga has feats and all kinds of, yeah. And so Saga, one thing that's really neat about it is that at higher levels, you can do incredible things, like very cinematic things in game.
Yeah.
One challenge with it, I will tell you that I will maybe warn you, is as the dungeon master, I know at really high levels, that game becomes harder and harder to manage because everyone gets so customized with like 17 things that only they can do. What ends up happening is your players end up telling you what you can do and not the other way around, right? You can't, as a dungeon master, adjudicate and know everything about every character. It's actually true of many role-playing games these days.
Yeah. That's fair. We've
got
what?
My husband, who's our editor, is also our GM for the Star Wars.
Yeah, he runs the game for us. He tries to kill us. We do our show. We do our game once a month, the second Monday of every month. We start a little bit early. We usually start our live shows at 7:00, but we start that one at 6:30 Eastern, and we usually go for about 3 hours and sit there and we just play and talk and laugh and make fun of each other. It's a good time. And laugh as John tries to kill us and has been unsuccessful so far.
What's really
he's come danger close at least twice, though. At least twice.
Oh yeah, no, we've had some close calls, but we've also had some times where it was he thought he was going to kill us, and then it went totally backward from what he thought was going to happen, which was fantastic.
Well, that's the beauty of it.
It is. He had this huge elaborate fight planned out, and then we took down his big bad. We took down his big bad in like 6 turns.
And I love that.
The look on his face was just like, really, guys?
Yeah.
Really?
What he expected to be the fight for pretty much the entire session was like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I think that happens to DMs all the time. I actually think it's like the equivalent of like the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark scene where he pulls out his gun and shoots the sword wheel. It's like that equivalent, right? It's like you're this DM that's been doing all this plan on this big showdown, and the players have messed it up for you. And that's the beauty of it. I like to think that good humored DMs love it when that happens in a weird sort of way.
I feel like anybody who thinks that they want to be a parent should try to DM.
Totally. It helps you set your expectations and how the best laid plans.
And I mean, every group I've ever been part of, and I don't know if it's just me or if it's just every group in general, they end up becoming this little band of murder hobos. And you have more than one kid. That's all you're dealing with too.
Well, for what it's worth, I'm running a campaign with my little ones. I have 4 little ones. So I have a 3-year-old, 7, 9, and 11 now. My eldest, my 11-year-old daughter is named Vivian. Not a coincidence, yeah. And different spelling than what we used on Vivian Van Tassel. But I actually run an old school D&D campaign with them. And I'm running them through the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh right now. It's really fun. It's really fun. One thing I like best is I love how creative they. Let me give an example. Like the beauty of role playing again is that it gives you this chance to like solve things, right? Independent of combat, which is really fun, and independent of group storytelling. It gives these kids a chance to like solve things in this this role playing, this imaginary context. So I remember one of the first modules I had ever run for my kids. It was kind of a made up. It wasn't D&D per se. It was something that I kind of scrapped together. But basically, my daughter, she wanted to play as a fairy, and she had fairy dust. Think like Tinkerbell type, like fairy dust rules. So like you need fairy dust to fly. That was the deal, right? Or at least the according to like the Tinkerbell series they have on Disney Plus. Anyway, so what was so cool about it is that I remember the idea was I'd sent her into this like throne room where she had to like get some treasure that was behind the throne. It was heavily guarded. Like the king was sitting on the throne and there was like 2 guards right in front, but right behind it, there was like this treasure she needed, right? Some artifact. And I remember like she flew in. I don't remember what I expected her to do, but I remember it was not what I expected. So she flew in like on the very top near the rafters of this great throne room, which made sense. That's what I thought she would do. But then I thought what she would do is like float down and like steal it and then kind of float out. And what she ended up doing was floating above it and then dropping fairy dust on the artifact to levitate it back up there. I'm like, that's so creative. What a cool idea. I would have never.
Smart.
So it was just things like that I think it gives kids all of these different like tools to think a little bit differently.
Sure.
You know, and this stuff, you know, you can bring this to your real life. So I think it was really, really fun. So I've really enjoyed role playing with little kids. And yes, to your point, Kathleen, I think every parent should be a DM. It sets you up for failure of your plans, among other things.
Oh yeah. Yeah. My husband does, it's Hero Kids. So it's a different game set, but he does that with our daughter. And then he's got Hero Kids in Space, which is loosely Star Wars based, that he's run for her too. And that's pretty easy. She just turned 5 in September. So it's very much you roll your D6, he rolls a D6, whoever has the higher number is the one who wins. Very simple concept. But that problem solving and the group story is so much fun with her. Nice.
No, I hear that. And for what it's worth, by the way, Star Wars to me is just tailor-made for role-playing games. When you think about the movies and the chatter, the back and forth, the tinny chatter in the movies, like, all right, kid, we're going to go for this. Oh, no, what about all of that? It plays so well into a role-playing game narrative. And in fact,
right.
The original creators of the West End version of Star Wars, I don't think the later modules did this, but if you ever look back on the original West End modules they did for the Star Wars role-playing game, they used to provide a script for the players. So in other words, there was like a 4 to 6 part script you would actually hand out to your players to start the adventure. And it usually started with player one, whoever that you decided that was, saying, I got a bad feeling about this. Oh, come on, it's going to be fine. It's only 5 minutes. We just have to negotiate the thing. Yeah, but what about that? Like, it was just one page. It was a little 1-page script they would give you, but it felt like Star Wars. And it just brought you into this kind of really fun narrative role play experience. So yeah, a big fan of Star Wars throughout all the editions.
Awesome.
And now, a word from our show sponsor, Level Up Sabered. Their link can be found in the show notes.
All right, so Michael, with your D&D books, now those are things that you have co-written with some other amazing co-writers, and we talked about them being on the show before. There's Kyle Newman, there's Jon Peterson, and some guy named Sam. Well, whatever, it's just shares the same last name, whatever. But how does the writing process for you differ in a collaborative effort versus your own book?
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, it really is pretty different. I have to admit, having now been through it in a couple different ways. Tim, you still run off and do your own work, but there's a lot of, I guess there's two big different pieces. When I think about, like, you have to collaboratively come up with a plan about how you're going to attack the work. You have to be aligned on that, or you can't write a book together, right? Sure. Now, the good news is there's a lot of modular pieces that I think people don't quite realize. When you write a book like, for example, Lore and Legends that we just finished, if you really flip through that book, one thing you can realize right away is every call out. We have a call out called the Who Is series. Who is Mordenkainen? Who is Tasha? Who is Fizban? Who is Serac? Whatever. We do all of these different characters that are our key D&D characters that they feature in the 5th edition. So those are all like 1-page call outs that are all totally modular. Like, we can all split those up and just go and write them on our own. We don't have to worry about other people. Here's the thing. We all review and edit each other's work, so everyone's going to see those. But you can go split those up and just go off and write your own thing. So that's really nice. It's a little bit more complicated when you're trying to piece together the whole narrative. So I'll give you an example for what we did for Art and Arcana. When we figured out what that book was supposed to be, so this was in 2018. This was our big visual history of D&D that was covering basically the first 45 years up to date, basically. Lore and Legends being the sequel to that, kind of the last 10 years. But when we did Art and Arcana, we came up with a methodology. We came up with a couple of things that I think really served us well, and it helped us not only tackle the project in the right way, but also help us divide it up. What we ended up doing is, firstly, we decided this isn't an art book. This is a visual history. And the reason that was an important distinction was that we realized that an art book, for better or for worse, is something that you kind of like, well, first of all, how do you even curate an art book? Like, how do you decide what should be in and out? And that's a problem with a lot of art books, I think, is people say, well, I just chose this really cool, different thing because it was cool and different. Well, that's going to be different for every person. That's a completely subjective way to approach it. It's fine. But what we figured out is that we need a way to curate all of this infinite art that we've got at our disposal. How do we do this? So we figured out that we were going to follow the story of the brand. And so we were going to basically decide what was important for the D&D brand. Sometimes it was product. Sometimes it was some external thing that happened, like the Satanic Panic and other things, But whatever it was, we would follow the heartbeat of the brand. And by doing that, what happens is you give yourself a mechanism by which you can now curate art. So the difference between an art book and a visual history is fundamentally that a visual history is trying to tell the story of something with visuals. And it doesn't have to be art. It can be pictures of people playing the game. It can be old advertising. It can be photographs of ephemera, right? And so that's why I think Art and Arcana really was successful. But to get to the point of that is that what we needed to do then is we actually needed to outline exactly what the story of the brand was over the 40 years, give or take. So we basically created a really detailed timeline about all of the important stuff that happened year to year. And then we divided up the decades. We literally said, okay, John, you're going to take decade 1, and Mike, you're going to take decade 2, and Sam's going to be decade 3. We literally cut up the 4 decades that we were writing about, and then we went off and wrote them, but we wrote them based on a collaborative timeline that was made with all of us. And so we knew what we were writing about. And then once that was written, we could edit each other's work to make sure it was smooth and it felt like a single voice. And then we could graph down the imagery. Then we could actually have a real conversation about curating imagery, because we weren't just pie in the sky. You take 4 different authors, you're going to have 4 different ideas about what should go on any given page. But when you know what you're talking about and you all agree on what the talking points are, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more clear about what you need to show.
Yeah, you have a fixed perspective instead of one going this way, one going that way, one going that way. Yeah.
And so we did. So to answer your question, we did the same thing for Lore and Legends. That's how we approached that project. Is we basically established that timeline. We divided and conquered. We shoved it back together, and that helped us understand what we needed to show from art. Which, for the record, was even more complicated for this book because we had unlimited access to the entire Wizards archive of everything they made for 5th edition. That's a major difference because let's just say for the purpose of the conversation that's 50,000 pieces, maybe it's 100. It was a gazillion pieces. Well, for Art and Arcana, one thing we did have going for us is that yes, you have this curation conversation, but there was also the conversation around rarity. You actually don't have everything when it comes down to the archive. Like a lot of the pieces that were the most important in D&D lore had entered the private collector community 40 years ago. They were gone.
Okay.
And so that project became almost as much about archaeology as it was curation. That is to say, if you could go find something that you've been looking for, you were going to use it because you went to a lot of trouble to find it. And so there was a lot of that as well, is when we were trying to find, for example, the original wraparound covers for the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books, the original native covers without any trade dress on them, without the text bubbling back. Finding those firstly, it was a miracle that we were able to. But B, once you had found them, you had to show them their original form, full spread. You had to show it that way because it was just so rare and interesting. So it was different challenges. But again, the process was basically the same. Figure out what you're trying to outline together and then divide and conquer.
Very cool.
Awesome.
All right.
So I know that a lot of our conversation is going to be very D&D heavy because that's what you've written the most about. But I know that you're also a well-rounded nerd, as we all are. So what are your other fandoms? What else do you enjoy? Are you a superhero guy? Obviously Star Wars, but are you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I love Star Wars is probably my other big fandom. Let me think this through for a second. I might get a little bit, actually I might step back a little bit from that and even say, so I love middle grade fantasy. So let me just so that covers a lot of ground. First of all, if you think about Fablehaven or Percy Jackson, like we talked about, I think Sarah J. Maas, she walks on water as a writer. I think she's spectacular. A lot of, Throne of Glass and all of her, so I guess I would say I cover a lot of ground, but I guess what I'm getting at is I love the style of middle grade fiction. And one thing I really like about it is it's pretty straightforward. It's not trying to be overly complicated. It's pretty straightforward storytelling because they're written for younger readers, right? You're not trying to overcomplicate. but there's a beauty in that style that I really gravitate to. So I guess from a fandom standpoint, I would start with I do love middle grade fiction and young adult fiction. And then growing out from there, yes, Star Wars, I'm firmly in the Star Wars camp. I grew up with that. I lived and breathed Star Wars and all the Lucasfilm stuff, honestly, Indiana Jones and all that business. I love Star Trek too. I wouldn't say I'm quite as deep on Star Trek as Star Wars, but a lot of this stuff really comes from my brother. To be honest with you, as the younger brother of Sam, and you know how deep he is in the fandom and the geekdom of the whole thing. Ooh. So you can pretty much bet anything he was deep into, I was deep into because I had no choice. I mean, we were watching those Saturday morning cartoons together, whether we liked it or not, and we were going to watch what he wanted to watch, not what I wanted to watch. So I've been following him around for, the last, 40-some years now. So anything he's
you're going to watch this and you're going to like it.
Exactly. No, he was very benevolent in the whole thing. He really was. He really did care. But for better or for worse, he really got me into the things he was into because he wanted to share them. Honestly, he was a wonderful older brother, and he was really interested in making sure that we could enjoy these things together. Even if that was a forced situation where I was going to sit and watch his. We were going to watch Next Generation for hours and hours on end, so that we would know it together, and it was fun. So I'm relatively deep on Star Trek, and I really really like Star Trek as well.
Cool.
See, I love it. That's just how that goes with older siblings, though. Like I have 2 older brothers and an older sister, and so much of the things that I got into growing up was they were the ones who were in charge. They were the ones who had the remote, so I watched what they watched.
Absolutely. That's just how that goes, right? But I got to tell you, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. There was such a magic. Some of my warmest and best memories are sitting in our kind of mildewy basement, on this kind of dirty brown carpet that we had, and watching this old wood panel TV we had in the basement with the wood paneled VCR right above it. It was an RCA. And sitting with my brother and watching Saturday morning cartoons, before my parents were up. And it's funny, looking back on it, we were being manipulated by toy companies who were making TV shows to sell their toys. Oh, yeah. But boy, did I love those shows, and boy, did I love those commercials. Actually, I would sit and just watch commercials, and they were just so exciting to imagine how, nobody really has a playset like they had in, those old He-Man commercials. Like you look at the playsets these kids are playing, like they're all built out, and they're like, they have like a terrarium where they've got, Moss Man coming out of it. I'm like, that's not realistic, but boy, did that give you great ideas to help you play with your own action figures. So yeah, I've got really warm, fuzzy memories about kind of all that stuff.
That's awesome.
That's cool. Love it.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked a lot about your different books and everything else, but now we need to talk about one of your books. This one here, the cookbook.
Oh,
this thing, I did a little unboxing video of this, and I was legitimately impressed with how beautiful this cookbook is and how well it is done, and just the art and the imagery and the descriptions on how to make the meals and everything. Very, very cool. So my question for you, my good sir, how did you guys stumble upon the idea of we should make a cookbook about D&D?
Well, stumble's the right word to use, I think. So we, I'll tell you exactly how this is. So for what it's worth, nobody is more surprised than me to have written not one, but now 2 cookbooks and have a cooking show and all these things. Again, like I cook, but I'm not like a professional chef. So believe me, no one is more surprised than me that we're sitting here talking about cookbooks. But what a wonderful thing, how this has all come about. So we stumbled on the idea. Actually, credit goes to Aaron Weiner from 10 Speed Press, who is our publisher for these books. We were finishing up Art and Arcana. This is probably in 2019, maybe early 2020. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Art and Arcana, 2018. We were finishing up Art and Arcana in 2018, and Aaron came to us. Now, Aaron at 10 Speed Press, he is he's the publisher of a couple of different imprints over there. Now, 10 Speed is under Penguin Random House. Mm-hmm. He has another imprint called Clarkson Potter. And Clarkson Potter is also, like 10 Speed, is known for highly graphical, really beautiful books. And one of the things they specialize in is cookbooks. And in fact, under their imprint is the Barefoot Contessa series. So Aaron is the publisher, of Ina Art Garden. So he really knows something about cookbooks. He knows how to do this, right? So he came to us when we were wrapping up Art and Arcana, which had gone really well. We were all super pleased with it. On the publisher side, on our side, we were all super happy. We loved working together. And he said, hey, I've been working with you now. You know D&D better than anybody, as far as I can tell. He said, I've had this idea for a while to do a cookbook. I want to do a D&D cookbook. What do you think? We're like, well, okay, well, let's beat that up a little bit. Let's beat that idea up a little bit. And one thing we were worried about initially, which was not his idea, we were worried about, like, are we talking about one of those licensed cookbooks where they're like, oh, look, D&D hot dogs. And they put like a D&D logo, and it's just a bunch of normal food. They just put like, and they come up with some, kitschy name, and that's it. We're like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And that wasn't the idea.
A hot dog with a D&D stamp on the end of it.
Exactly. Oh, D&D chicken fingers, just what we always wanted, right? So we're like, we're not doing that. We're not interested. But no, Aaron's like, no, like this would be a really high end, like we want to really dig deep on lore. Like, what do you think? So we all got together with Aaron and we're like, okay, what can this be? What is a valuable thing that, us as D&D historians and kind of lore masters, where can we add value to a piece like this? So what we decided was, you know what? They've never done a D&D source book specifically on food. What if we think of this differently? What if we think of this as, yes, it's going to be a D&D cookbook. It's going to be 100% in-world. Nothing, it's not going to be all puns and silly stuff. It's going to be like the real stuff that your characters eat when you play a game of D&D. It's going to be that. So it's going to be really well researched. We're going to find all of the important dishes that you eat in a D&D campaign. And that's the stuff we're going to do. And then the photography is going to be very in-world. We're going to make sure that looks really authentic. And what we decided was, well, let's do this too. Let's go a little bit deeper. Let's figure out how we can, let's do more research than anyone's ever done on D&D food. And let's figure out what the dining habits and the etiquette is of like halflings and elves and dwarves and this type of thing. And this will basically be the ad hoc D&D source book for food. That's how we wanted to think of it. It was going to be the player's handbook of food, basically. And I think by thinking about it that way, it made us really drill deep on D&D lore and making sure the book really felt authentic. So I'd like to think, at least with the first Heroes Feast, which came out in 2020, that book, I think the market responded to it so well because I think we went to such trouble to make sure that it was really scratching the itch of people that really wanted to eat what elves in D&D eat and to figure out a way to do that. So that book was so successful. It not only led to a sequel, which you're holding right there, Heroes Feast Flavors of the Multiverse.
Right.
It also led to a cooking show that was just produced by E1 and Hasbro called Heroes Feast. It's actually based on the book, and they literally cook through dishes in this book. But I think it came back to the idea that what was our skill set? Where could we as authors add value to a book like this? So once we had figured out what we wanted to make, 10 Speed teamed us up with this incredible professional chef named Adam Reed, who's on America's Test Kitchen. If anyone watches cooking shows, they might know him from that. He's the one that does usually test out kitchen gadgets and things like that. And so he ended up kind of coming up with a real world implementation of what we were describing as the dishes we needed. And we would go back and forth sometimes. Adam would come up with something that actually, for some reason, maybe had an ingredient that wouldn't work in this particular campaign setting. So we had to go back to him and say, Adam, can we do something different? So I think the book was very lovingly made with a really wonderful group of, again, chefs and artists and production designers and photographers, and then us just doing our part, figuring out what dishes we were going to use, what the lore of those dishes was, and then figuring out the background. So when we got into Heroes Feast Flavors of the Multiverse, which just came out in November, brand new book, we decided we were going to really turn up the volume on this book. So one thing was awesome is that we got some fresh thinking back into it, because on the original Heroes Feast, Sam was really busy with work. He had a lot of acting work at the time, doing voiceover and whatnot. So he dropped off for the first Heroes Feast. We brought him back in for this one, and he injected a lot of new creativity and ideas for this book. And so for Flavors of the Multiverse, what we really wanted to do is that everything people liked about the first book, we wanted to turn up the volume on. So, for example, the food photography. We loved the food photography in the first book, but food books tend to have relatively close photography of food. I mean, that's the nature of it. We wanted to be able to back the camera out and really show you some environments. We wanted to bring D&D to life. So one thing we did is we rented a castle. We made our publisher rent a castle for this cookbook so that we could shoot like wider angle shots of both food and suits of armor and giant hearths and gargoyles on battlements. Like we wanted all of that to be in there. So we went really big on food photography. We added this super fun narrative. of basically characters that are wandering around the D&D world. And that gave us basically the narrative foundation to figure out what areas we would feature and what food to feature. Yeah. So yeah, you're showing a picture right now of the battlements. Like a lot of people think that like that is like photoshopped or it's whatever. That's all 100% legitimate photography. That is literally photographed right there on those battlements. And with those mountains in the background, that's all exactly how it looks. So it was a super fun project to do. And we really just, again, we just turned up the volume on the creativity of the dishes, the places that we visit. You know, we start at the Yawning Portal, which is a very famous D&D tavern, but then we end up going into space on a Spelljammer to the Rock of Brawl, which is kind of this D&D meets Star Wars universe. We go to places like the Dragonlance world of Kryn. So we really feature a lot of different locales. Ravenloft, which people love, which is kind of a horror fantasy campaign world. And again, we just really wanted to go big on that book. So I'm really happy to say people that liked the first book seem to love this book. And, you know, we're off to the races on this. And again, the cooking show that's on every week right now on Freevee and Plex doesn't hurt, because now a lot of people are watching that and going back and seeing what's available as far as these books go.
You know, and the great thing about so one of the things I always worry about when I see branded cookbooks and things like this, A, is what you described earlier. It's just going to be some crackpot, you know, chicken fingers and hot dog thing. Or B, it's going to have some weird ingredients that you just can't find at your one of the things I love about this is that I have turned through a lot of different of these pages on this and looking at it and going, oh man, like I'm not going to lie. I'm looking at the Sealy Court cheese and potato soup right now, and my mouth is watering. This picture is making my mouth water for this cheese and potato soup, because potato soup is one of my favorite things. And I'm reading the ingredients and I'm going, there's nothing in here that I couldn't go straight to the grocery store and pick up and take it right home and make this afternoon, which might actually be happening now that I'm talking about it. But this looks just absolutely fantastic. The photography is wonderful. And like I said, the ingredients, more importantly, there's nothing in this book where I look at it and go, yeah, that's just too far out of pocket. That's not something that can be done. And I think that's a very big feather in your guys' cap, is that this is something that's obtainable and reachable for the average person to be able to pick this up, go try it, make the food, and have fun with their D&D campaign.
You know, thank you for pointing that out, because that was, and it's a huge credit, by the way, to, you know, to Chef Adam Reed, as well as our editors at 10 Speed as well, because they, you know, we wanted to always make sure we try to create something a little bit different, right? Anything that you eat in the D&D world, sometimes it's just like what you might have here, right? Sometimes it literally is just the same food, right? But a lot of the things, again, especially if you're using, you know, say monster meat or whatever, it needs to be a little bit different, right? So we try to press the envelope just a little bit. But to the credit of the people we worked with, there was always a collaboration about, you know, it needs to be sourceable. It needs to be something you can go to a normal grocery store and pick up this stuff. And sometimes we do press a little bit further afield, just once in a while. For example, we've got tavern crickets that are actually, it's a mix of, it's like a snack mix with crickets. That's not common. You know, that's not the everyday thing you find in that book. But it was important that we once in a while do that to make sure to give you D&D flavor, I guess, pun intended. But also, again, it was super important that just about any grocery store you go to, that you can source the ingredients to make this stuff, because it's not a useful cookbook if nobody can make anything inside. To your point, Tim, like you have to be able to go and make this stuff, and that's what we want. And what's been so fun, honestly, one of the things that I think I'm most grateful for, the fan community around these books. You know, for example, there's a huge Facebook group that's just on, it's the Heroes Feast Facebook group. And there's a number of other ones out there where there's a big community of people that love to make these things and then photograph them and then share them back with the group. And they share, for example, substitutions they made in various ingredients. Oh, I took this, but I made this, you know, a vegan stew, or I did this. And it's just so fun to watch this group of people collaborating and sharing their ideas. And just, again, it's the nature of the D&D community, really, is kind of collaborating and imagining together and kind of riffing on each other. So it's been super fun to watch. It's kind of taken a life of its own, and I'm just really grateful to be involved.
That's awesome.
I look forward to it. It is on my to-buy list because I need it. But I have the Skyrim cookbook. I have the official Skyrim cookbook. It was gifted to me as an anniversary gift a couple of years ago. And I love that. There are some really cool recipes in it, but not everything is that easily found there were seasonings, there were spices I had to special order because I'm like, there's no place that's going to carry those around here. But I look forward to this even more now with I don't necessarily have to go buy crickets, but
no, you don't. And for the record, anytime we give you a suggestion of something that's harder to source, it actually tells you where to get it, usually in the book.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So for example, if you want to use this, go get Bob's Red Mill, whatever. So if you can at least find where to source that, or even order it online. Anytime we have something that's harder to source, we'll usually give you an idea about how to get it, because again, that's the nature of it. I mean, again, to your earlier points, it's just not a useful cookbook if you can't make the stuff in it. So
right.
Exactly.
I also
Very cool.
really want potato soup now too.
Right? I looked at that picture, and I blame Michael now. But I looked at that picture, and now all I want is potato and cheese soup. And literally, my mouth is watering. I just
messaged my husband with I'm making potato soup for dinner tonight now. Like,
for the record, it's funny. I must be part Elven or something, because the Elven dishes in both books, actually, the Elven section, the first Hero's Feast, and then what's the Feywild section of this book, which are mostly Elven dishes, are most of my favorite dishes in the whole Hero's Feast collection. I also really like the Halfling stuff as well. The Halfling stuff's always amazing, but the Elven stuff always works for me. It has the right balance of like lightness and delicious, fresh flavors. Like, for example, Tim, if you turn to the picture of, for example, the Elven flatbread, it's a focaccia that's decorated with fresh veg. It's like the most delicious looking thing in the history. I
saw
of the
that actually just a minute ago when I was kind of jumping through sections of the book. I was like, oh.
I'm gonna have to get this one though, like pretty quick. I have a friend who her baby shower is next month, and it's sort of Hobbit themed, and I've been put in charge of potato soup, so I'm gonna be making potato soup from D&D for her Hobbit-esque baby shower.
That's awesome.
Kender stumble noodles. Oh my dear God!
You're never gonna be a skinny man.
But hey, no, thank you. Actually, you mentioned it, not me. So Kender stumble noodles. So those of you who don't know what Kender is about, Kenders are like halflings on the world of Kryn, the Dragonlance world. Anyone that's ever read a Dragonlance, Tasselhoff, Burfoot is a Kender. Yeah, and so. Yeah, he's great, right?
Look at that.
Yeah, and he's got such great spirit, Tasselhoff.
Oh my God.
The deal with Kender stumble noodles, actually, to not give you the lore, I won't bore you with the lore, but what I will tell you about it is that they actually, this was news to us as well. Actress Deborah Ann Wall just wrote a D&D adventure, formerly for Wizards of the Coast, that's now on D&D Beyond. And it's a Hero's Feast branded adventure. So it's super cool. And the deal is that, if I understand it right, I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So Deborah has written this wonderful adventure where you are, as far as I can tell, trying to find the ingredients to go make the world's greatest mac and cheese, which in fact is Kender stumble noodles, which I guess they actually give you the recipe at the end of the adventure. It's actually part of the thing you buy. So it's really, when I see that, I'm just so, like I said earlier, this thing has taken a mind of its own a little bit. Now that, D&D is doing some Heroes Feast brand game material with people like Deborah Ann Wall, who's amazing as a dungeon master, as a designer, as an author. So I'm just super excited to see where this all goes. But Kender stumble noodles is like the dish you're trying to make, if I understand it right, in that adventure.
Oh, that's awesome.
This book is a problem. I keep looking through, turning the page, going, "Oh, I'd eat that. Oh yeah, I'd eat that. Oh yeah, oh my God, I definitely would eat that."
So I only had one more question prepared for today, and now I totally, it doesn't even matter anymore. I now want to ask you, Mike, how would you explain the path that your life has taken to 6-year-old you playing D&D for the first time? Like, how do you go from the little kid in the outskirts of Chicago playing D&D to somebody who is writing for it?
That's a great question. So I'll say this. I'll say what I think a lot of people that are, a lot of people in the arts and entertainment these days, I think we'll say something similar about D&D, whether it's Vin Diesel or Joe Manganiello or any number of people that basically say, D&D was kind of like their training ground for imagination, right? And by the way, I think it can go in a lot of different ways. I don't think it has to be D&D, but for whatever reason, we were playing D&D in the 80s, and it helped us imagine together in a really, positive and encouraging way that I guess what I would say about it is, for whatever reason, it encouraged us to follow our passions and our imagination. It's not silly to want to dream up this stuff and think about this stuff and imagine together. And so again, I'm not sure if I'm going to attribute this as much to D&D as maybe more of a matter that I was always following my passions, or maybe more to the point, I was following passions that Sam had that he made me do. So it's D&D or Star Wars or whatever. But so now as an adult, and as someone that, I have a regular job, I've got, kind of a regular life. But I've always been really encouraged to follow my passions. And I think I've been given a lot of tools through games like D&D and Star Wars and role-playing games and so forth. And so for me, it's second nature to want to use my free time to create creative things. Like it's just built into my thing that I have to be using my talents to be creative, whatever that is. And I would say the same at the work I do. My regular job is I'm in marketing. And I try to be as creative as I can be as well. But it's very second nature to me to want to spend my free time creating things and playing creative games. So I guess writing about D&D just feels like an extension of all of that. It doesn't feel like a huge departure. To your point, Kathleen, I never thought I was going to do it, though. I did not grow up thinking I was going to be a writer. That was not really on the list.
Yeah.
I kind of fell into it in a really organic way. I was actually in a master's program where I had to do a special project. I was forced into it. And for some reason, it got to the top of my mind that I should do a project on the creation of D&D and Gary Gygax. That's how my first book was written. It was actually originally a master's thesis type project that turned into a book. So again, I would just point back to the fact that I think we were really encouraged to be creative, and that we were sharpening those tools in a place like D&D.
That's awesome. That's like the best answer.
Very fun. Very fun answer. All right, Michael, one final silly question. And we started asking this, and as we've been explaining to our guests, we used to ask a variety of different silly questions, but we started settling on this one about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago.
About 2 months ago.
And we started asking this one because Kathleen and I agreed it's a shame that you don't get asked this question as an adult. So, Michael Witwer, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Favorite dinosaur is a brontosaurus.
Oh, nice pick.
That is a solid pick.
Because they can look above the trees and see everything. They can see everything.
That's true.
So brontosaurus. Yeah.
Solid answer. I like it.
Yeah.
And I love the reason for it too. That's great.
I love asking people who have kids what their favorite dinosaur is too, because it's I'm still very much in the dinosaur phase. I know dinosaurs.
I can tell you those names, not a problem.
But I had to cycle through in my head all the different dinosaurs, and I could remember most of them. I think. I mean, most of them I know. I don't know all the dinosaurs, but yeah, I had to cycle through them. Like, okay, Stegosaurus, no, it's not Stegosaurus. Tyrannosaurus Rex, no. Raptor, no. I had to go through all of them in my head a little bit, and then I was like, oh yeah, Brontosaurus, because they take the bite of that soupy, spinach looking stuff or whatever, and they lift their head up above the trees and they look around, and they do brontosaurus things, and I like that. They're big.
Cool. They are very cool. Oh, Michael, we have enjoyed this conversation so much today. Where can our viewers and our listeners go to find out more about you and your work?
Thank you. So you can find me, my website is empireofimagination.com, named after my first book. So empireofimagination.com, one word. You can also find me at Mike Witwer on Twitter. And you can find me on Instagram at Unearthed Arcanist. Unearthed Arcanist. So I'm in a few different places. And yeah, again, we've got a lot of stuff kind of, again, as I mentioned, it's been a year of a lot of books. And so there's a lot of places right now. We've got a lot of things out right now. We've got the new Heroes Feast Flavors of the Multiverse. We've got Lore and Legends, which is a sequel to Art and Arcana, which again is really a deep dive on the last 10 years and really how the 5th edition of D&D became such a superstar in this analog era we live, this digital era we live in. And then, of course, we've got Vivian Van Tassel and The Secret of Midnight Lake, which has been a huge passion project. And then we've got the Heroes Feast cooking show, which, by the way, good news on this. I'm not doing the cooking on that. We're not doing the cooking as authors. They have real chefs like Chef Mike Harris, who's amazing, and Sujata Day, who's a wonderful host, and they're the ones that really drive that thing. So Heroes Feast, if you're interested in checking that out, that is currently streaming live on Freevee like it airs live. I mean, it's not like a live show. It airs live on Freevee at 8 o'clock Central on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then it's available streaming on Plex. You can watch it on demand on Plex. So
Cool.
Heroes Feast. Yeah, it's been a heck of a lot of fun this season.
Awesome.
I am looking forward to it. Definitely. I'm going to watch it after I watch the next part of the 60th anniversary Doctor Who special that goes up today. But that's
awesome. Good choice.
All right. Well, we will definitely link your website and your socials so that our viewers and our listeners can find you. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by this wonderful cat that has decided he has to lay where my keyboard is.
No, that's
Trying to
what
get him
cats
to
do.
not push buttons.
They like keyboards. It's their jam. That's what they do.
He's also bigger
All right,
than
guys.
the keyboard desk.
All right, guys, I want to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing you can do to help our show continue to grow and help us to get more amazing guests like Michael Witwer here today to have these great conversations and funny moments for you to be able to listen to. Now, I want to remind you, too, that we also have a Patreon page where there are 5 levels of subscription from $1 to $40. And I guarantee you that you have not seen the entirety of this conversation. Some of it's going to be over on Patreon. So if you were digging this conversation, I guarantee you there's some extra snippets and bonus clips over on Patreon that you're going to want to check out. Not to mention in that $1 to $40 range, not only does that get you early access, but also gets you some really cool free merch that's just part of your subscription that you can't get anywhere else. So you're going to want to check that out over on patreon.com/FSF Podcast, or just click the link down below. But if for whatever reason you are not happy with the content of our show today, please feel free to lodge a complaint with the head of our complaint department, and that, of course, is Michael Witwer's editor. While we are sure that Michael is a great and kind guy, most editors, although nice, have no issue with removing errors and issues. And if you have watched this show long enough, you know that you're bound to find plenty of both, because typically I'm the error. Kathleen
I'm the issue.
Yeah, she's the issue. It is what it is. So send in one copy of your complaint to Michael's editor. That's all they need. They'll be able to right the wrongs and erase the issues. However, preemptively, Kathleen and I would like to lodge an apology for our many issues and errors. Maybe you can forgive and forget. It is, after all, the nice thing to do.
Please don't let them delete me.
No disintegration.
No.
So, Michael, thank you so much for your time. This has been a lot of fun. And hey, guys, go check out his stuff. Like I said, we'll have links down below. And that's going to wrap us up today for the FSF Popcast. Goodbye.
Copyright 2023 FSF Popcast.
Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Popcast. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpopcast.com. Original music by Jordan Michaels.